Which also gets to, I think, one of the larger macro things that's going to happen here in the global economy, which is we might be going through a recession brought on by high energy prices. I'll get to that in a second, but we're absolutely going through a globalization recession, by which I mean we sort of reached the high water mark of globalization, and now you have all of these countries competing geopolitically, so they want their own supply chain. They don't care about just-in-time supply. They care about resiliency and redundancy and control over their own property. So advanced semiconductors is one of the most shining examples. In the State of the Union just this week, Biden talked about how Intel's building a big factory in Ohio, ostensibly to try and catch up. They're not the only ones. Look at the EU. They have a semiconductor strategy. China has a semiconductor strategy. The Japanese, the South Koreans, everybody's building their own thing. So if you look at the long term, actually, China might be hoping that 10 years from now, Taiwan only makes the advanced semiconductors for themselves and suddenly isn't that important. But this gets to your point about the global economy, which is, I mean, if we're going on here for more than 4 to 8 weeks of this conflict, I guess it really depends how the conflict goes. All of Ukraine's commercial ports are still closed. I believe it's been 6 or 7 days now that they've been closed. As far as I know, also, Russia's not been letting commercial traffic in and out of the Black Sea. The Turks say they've closed the Bosphorus to military ships. I don't know if that means commercial ships as well, but I know from some of the clients and partners that I talk to that it's very, very difficult to get ships right now, and certainly in and out of the Black Sea. And that's so important because, to your point, 50% of Russia's exports go out through the Black Sea. 90% of their agricultural exports go out through the Black Sea. And just not to go too doom and gloom, but let's say we are 4 weeks, 4 weeks from now into this conflict. That's exactly when the planting season is supposed to begin for the next cycle of crops. So if Ukrainian farmers are not able to sow their barley and their corn and their sunflower and their wheat here at the end of March, early April, not only then are we dealing with logistical disruptions that could theoretically be solved if there was some kind of arrangement, or even if the war is still going on, but they allow safe passage to just commercial vessels. But if you get to April and Ukrainian farmers can't get to their crops, now we're talking about when you come to July and August, you're actually talking about a shortage of supply in the market itself. And that'll hurt in Western economies, obviously. Like, we'll pay higher prices at restaurants than at the grocery store. But for countries like Turkey or Egypt or Saudi Arabia or Nigeria that depend on Russia and Ukraine for these wheat imports, I mean, that's the sort of stuff that sets off a political revolution. The Arab Spring was born in that kind of high food price thing. And I haven't even talked about energy prices yet. Because if, let's say, you don't get the Iran nuclear deal, the civil war in Libya kicks off, and then nobody wants to buy Russian oil. Is there an upper limit on how high oil can get? We haven't been in a situation like that, at least in 73, and maybe that wasn't even the perfect analogy. So when you put it all together, if we're talking about multiple weeks here, we're probably, not only are we looking at hyperinflation, I think we're probably looking at a pretty severe recession brought on by high energy prices, because once energy prices go that high, it's not up to the central banks anymore. At a certain point, the economy is just not going to be able to bear it.
Just want to pull up Raul's Twitter feed again, if we could. And based on what happens, and this idea of the green agenda is really hotly debated right now, but this is where Raul comes down on it. The fate of he says, if he thinks this could rather accelerate the green energy commitment, which I think is not everyone agrees on, a global deal with Iran, a shift towards Morocco for manufacturing, Algeria for gas, as regional further splinter into more regionalized supply chains that they can control easier, i.e. not Russia or China. Do you see this playing out? Is this going to permanently alter the supply chains if that wasn't already happening?
I agree with about half of that. On supply chains, certainly, between the shale revolution, COVID, populism, anti-trade, Trump, Biden, all of that combined, there is now not a manufacturing process in East Asia that can be done more cheaply than its equivalent in North America. You just have to build the industrial plant first. And I realize that takes years based on the sector. So the US right now is going through its fastest industrialization ever, even faster than what we did during World War II. And this is only going to accelerate that entire process as we basically draw a big, thick line between the North American system and this China-centric system. And since the United States system has Mexico and has the consumption and China does not, that ends with China being removed as a significant manufacturing player, assuming it doesn't collapse on its own first.
And so you're talking about when you say industrialization, you're talking about the rebuilding of factories, the rebuilding of supply chains. I'm assuming you mean energy. Do you think the U.S. energy producers ramp back up again?
We need to double roughly our industrial plant. In terms of energy, there's going to be a whole mix of things in there. As long as Biden does not end the U.S., does not reinstate the U.S. energy export embargo, you're going to see a huge expansion of drilling, because you're talking about feeding into a system that's at least 5 million barrels per day shy. If prices stay under 170 in that environment, I would be shocked. But Biden is also a populist. There is no way that he or Trump or Obama would expose the American population to $200 oil if he didn't have to. And he doesn't have to, because in the 2015 omnibus bill, the president has the ability to slam the export ban back into place at any time without needing to go to Congress first. So one way or another, the world is not just losing Russian crude, it's also losing American crude.
Do you expect that to happen, the export ban?
This year.
Wow, lot of big thoughts in this. I'm just absorbing it as we all are, Peter. I just want to end. We're almost out of time, but for those who want to read your book, there is something that you focus on, which is really important, and I just want to tease it. We're not going to have time to get into it all, but the undercurrent of all of what we're talking about is also demographics. You touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think it's really important when you're also talking about China. Why is that important? How do you view this in terms of who might be, I don't want to say a winner, but who might be better positioned to deal with some of these massive changes that you're talking about?
Let me give you the 1-minute version. People in their 40s and 50s are the savers. They're the high productive workers. They don't consume much. That's Europe. People in their 20s and the 30s, they're the low end workers. They're the consumers. That's maybe the Middle East. And people who are in their 10s and their single digits, they're the children. They're the workers of tomorrow. No one has children except for the United States, Mexico, France, and New Zealand.
United States, Mexico, France, and New Zealand.
Most advanced countries, and especially countries that are rapidly industrialized like China and Korea, they're already into that near retiree bracket. So we know that we're facing population collapses in a number of major economies, first and foremost China, because they stopped having kids in number 40 years ago.
What about India? What about Africa?
India is more like Mexico in that it's slowed down, but there's still decades left ahead of them. The problem with Africa is that they are such a huge importer of all the things that is necessary to maintain modern life, most notably agriculture, that if you break down global supply chains, a lot of these countries are going to dissolve.
What about Latin America?
Latin America is a pretty good spot. They've industrialized a little late and they've urbanized even later, but as a rule, they're kind of like a step behind Mexico in terms of the health of their demography. There's no country in Latin America that I'm overly concerned about, except for, of course, Venezuela, which has committed suicide.
We have a question from Phil asking about certain companies or countries with heavy Russian debt in rubles that will benefit debt reduction due to the drop in the ruble. I'm not sure that's the right conclusion to come from. I mean, if you are sitting with any kind of exposure to Russia, what is it investable at all? Is that an asset, or is there any upside at all in any exposure to Russia?
Well, I mean, so some people would argue that the price is down 98% in equities and 80 to 90% in bonds, and so anything that goes down that much should go up. But I would look at this situation first from a moral standpoint. This is like investing in German equities during the Holocaust. I mean, I don't think any American should be doing this. I mean, it's just wrong. But if the morality doesn't appeal to you, there's a good self-interested reason not to do it, which is that we have effectively expropriated huge economics from Putin, and he's a guy who doesn't respect rules and doesn't respect law. I can't imagine that he's going to allow debt to be repaid by Russia to foreign creditors. Why would he? It doesn't make any sense. And nor can I imagine that he's going to allow foreign equity holders continue to hold their equity. Why not expropriate, dilute, renationalize, whatever? And so, in these types of hostile situations, things can be cheap for a good reason, and they could probably get a lot cheaper. And so, even if the morality doesn't appeal to people, self-interest should. And there's a pretty strong argument that when all is said and done, Putin is just going to say, enough of this game of free market capitalism. We'll just take it all for ourselves.
It's a really complicated world out there. We've got massive inflation, recession fears, war in Europe, COVID, China issues. What the hell's happening? Everyone's got an opinion, but who's right, who's wrong? As co-founder of Real Vision, I've got my own view, but maybe I'm wrong too. And I want to go and find out more from real experts, real in-depth analysis. And I've hand-chosen my experts for this 2-week journey of discovery in Global Recession. Is everyone wrong? I've chosen people like Peter Zeihan to talk to them about geopolitics, David Rosenberg about the economy, and Pierre Andran, the world's most famous energy trader, about how to navigate the oil markets and where it's all going. This starts on May the 2nd, and I'm going to learn so much about what really is going on and how to best navigate it. Yes, not everybody's going to be saying the same thing, but it's going to allow me to piece together an investment framework to navigate these complicated times. Now, normally we'd give you a 7-day trial for $1, but because this is so important for all of you, and I think it's one of the most important pieces of content we've ever done, we're extending that free trial for 2 weeks for $1. So you get the entire campaign of all of these great minds. And it's only $1 for all of this. So just go to realvision.com/global recession to find out more and join me as I try and figure out what the hell's going on.